Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitchanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Holy One, for giving us the mitzvah of learning and living words of Torah. So, this morning we're participating along with something like 200 other synagogues across the Reform movement in this pilot of the new Reform movement Torah commentary, which we as a congregation were really lucky a couple weeks ago when our scholar in residence was here. We got a little sneak peek of it, but this is the latest in the process of developing and refining what will go into this book, what it will look like, what voices are represented, and what are not, I guess, which ones are not. So it's an exciting opportunity, and of course we have a special stake in this particular project, as our rabbi's martyr, Janet and Shelley, wrote were the lead authors of the English translation in this new commentary. So it's a really exciting moment for the Reform movement. As part of the kind of required preparation for this, I got to kind of hear like some of the thinking about why a new commentary in this moment, and happy to discuss that at greater length later. I don't want to spend too much time, but the thought is that the Plowed is 50 or so years old and is an incredible work and collection of insight and literature of its time, but it is of its time, and it is, there's new archaeology, new research, new ways of approaching biblical literature and interpretation, and it felt like it was time for a new commentary, a new collection, not just a new translation, but also new collections of commentary from all sorts of different sources, new insights, and there are new questions that all of us are asking as we approach the text. So we're going to look at the text this morning, sort of similar to what Rabbi Mikva did a couple weeks ago. We're going to kind of focus on sort of the pieces that are on the sides here. I'm going to share my screen, and don't worry, I promise I'm going to zoom in. That's why. But just to give you a sense, just visually, it's okay if you can't read anything. I don't know that I can from here either. But this is what the proposed layout's going to look like. On the left, so in the middle is the Hebrew text and the translation. On the left is what they're calling the pshat, right? Which is sort of pshat is kind of, in Hebrew, it's the simplest meaning of the text. In this commentary, it's essentially kind of an elucidation of kind of essential ideas and elements, kind of explaining different pieces of the language or the text or what's going on in the story. On the right are the mikorot, the sources that are from, and this I think is on some level a broader innovation, that it brings just a wide variety of insights and scholars and theologians and rabbis, both from throughout Jewish history and throughout the Jewish bookshelf, but also in today's world. And then the piece that we're not really that our section that we've been assigned. So I did not choose the piece of this parsha that we're looking at. We were assigned. So if you have issues with what we're looking at more broadly, talk to the CCAR. But our section, unfortunately, there are also this new kind of category called chidushim, which are sort of, it means like innovations, but it's sort of contemporary approaches to the text. And what I will say is, for anybody that's interested who's in person, I have about 20 copies of the whole parsha, so you can come up and talk to me afterwards, and you can take it home and sort of look through it. But one of the things, because it's a pilot, is either tonight or tomorrow, Carol's going to send to the Torah study list a little feedback form, because this is part of the development of this project, right? This is by no means the finished piece, and our experience, your experience of studying with these materials, your experience of what worked for you, what didn't work for you, what works visually, what sources do you find meaningful, which ones are sort of like too far afield. So all of that feedback is what they're looking for. And the goal is to fill out the survey by the end of this coming week. Ideally sooner rather than later. And if you take this home and look at all of it, you can kind of talk about both what we talk about in here, and also as you're reading through, if you have other feedback from the other sections as well, feel free to incorporate that as well. This, though, is because it's in the pilot phase, it's not to be copied or widely distributed. So that's the caveat. Yes, Carol.
Yeah, I just ask you how...
Microphone.
It's okay. Go ahead. I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, just ask you how the reform issue here is different from, say, conservative or other...
Sure. So the question was, how is the kind of the issues that the reform commentary are going to bring up or approach different? Part of it is a slight difference in how we read the text. One of the questions that was actually discussed was like, how is this different from Eitz Chaim, right? Which is the conservative movement commentary. It's a beautiful work. I mean, similar to the Plout, but delves deeply. One of the things that was pointed out was the conservative movement, because they have a slightly different halachic approach to halacha in particular, approach to Jewish law, than the Reform movement does. They're going to answer some questions or interpret some pieces of text in a particular way that is kind of more focused on, I would argue, like conservative Jewish practice, whereas Reform, the Reform movement has a much broader and a much more liberal approach to halakha, to Jewish law, and so it might talk about kind of opportunities for practice as opposed to here's what we do. So that's one. But what I understand is the editors and the team that's working on this really sees it as a complement to, right? Not a replacement, but a complement to something like Eitz Chaim, a complement to the Plout. And in theory, that's asking questions from our day as well, that maybe from the time Eitz Chaim was written even, they're just new questions that have come up. I think both works, both the conservative movement and the Reform movement, kind of look at, one big question that I think is an animating question for any translation and commentary is, what is the authority of the text that you're working on, right? So in the Orthodox world, there's the understanding that the Torah is given by God in its entirety to Moses at Sinai and handed down through the generations. There's a much deeper investment in the sense that both in the Reform movement and conservative movement, that the Torah is a document created by humans aspiring to understand the divine, perhaps divinely inspired, and there are different interpretations of what that phrase means. But that also influences, I think, the reading of the text and the commentaries that are offered, to try to understand the broader context of like what's going on in the ancient Near East, and how does that help inform our reading of the text. Part of it too is, I think, as Reform Jews, we use all the tools at our disposal, right? From the perspective of the traditional rabbinic commentaries to modern biblical scholarship to thinking about modern science and psychology and history and archaeology, right? Sort of all of those things that are affecting how we might understand and interpret what's going on in these texts. So, without further ado, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 19, the very beginning. We're looking at the story of Sodom and Amorah, or Sodom and Gomorrah. And you'll notice in the translation that the Hebrew names of these places and names of people are a little bit more transliterated than what we would think is like Sodom and Gomorrah. It's Sodom and Amorah. But we're looking particularly at Lot's experience and at the behavior of the people of Sodom in particular. So the kind of framing question that we're going to look at is, how are Lot and the residents of Sodom portrayed? And how does their portrayal fit into the larger Parsha? Because keep in mind that this Parsha, right, Vayeira, the name of the Parsha comes from Abraham kind of looking up as he's, healing post-circumcision at 99 in the middle of the desert. He's hanging out in his tent, kind of recovering from that at the beginning of this Parsha. And he looks up and he sees these men approaching, who perhaps are angels, and welcomes them into his tent, right? We kind of all generally know the story. It's kind of the archetype of hospitality and welcoming and really going out of your way to make sure that guests feel well received and well respected and well treated, right? To the point that even our sanctuary, and one could argue even this space, is modeled after the tent of Abraham and Sarah, right? Known for being an open and welcoming place. And to a certain extent, what we see in Sodom is kind of the foil, right? The sort of the opposite of Abraham's welcoming. So, without further ado, let's see if this works. We're gonna click on this and zoom in. Yes. No, come here. Why? Okay. How is that? Can people see that? Here, I can make it a little bit bigger. Huh? It's Genesis 19, starting at verse 1. Okay, Elaine, go for it.
Shabbat Shalom. The two emissaries came to Sodom at sunset as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. As soon as Lot saw them, he got up to greet them, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Now, if you would, my lords, please come over to your servant's house. Stay the night and wash your feet. Then you can get an early start and be on your way." They said, "No, the city square is where we'll spend the night." But he pressed them hard. So they did go home with him and came into his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked flatbread, matzot, and they ate.
Okay, so similar to Abraham, right? They're coming, and it's interesting to note this kind of back and forth between Lot and these guests who are understood by tradition that these are the same guests that start with Abraham, same number of people, kind of a little bit mysterious. They seem to be journeying towards Sodom, right? Because what we have in the Parsha is Abraham sees these guests. They come, they eat, and they leave, and then God kind of shares with Abraham, somewhat reluctantly, this plan to go and destroy Sodom, and we have that scene where Abraham and God are arguing, right? If I can find 50 righteous men, 40, 30, 20, 10, will you save the city? God says yes. And then the next scene is what we're reading here, which is where these two emissaries, these two men, malachim, which could also mean angels, end up in Sodom. And it's interesting, right? Lot, like Abraham, says, "Please stay the night." And they say, no, we want to stay in the middle of the city square, which seems like not the best place to stay if you're new to town. And it's an interesting question of, is it almost a setup, right? Or a little bit of a are they trying to test the residents, right? Keeping in mind, Abraham has said, if I can find, if there are 10 people there, will you save the city? Barbara, go ahead.
Rabbi, I have a question because I have the Tanakh on a Tanakh app on my phone that I was watching and comparing.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, I understand the commentary changing. Are the different words because the Hebrew meanings have changed, or is it an interpretation? For example, here it says the city square, and on mine, the translation says a broad space. And I was just wondering if that's part of what's changing from the Hebrew part. Have the Hebrew words changed what they mean, or?
So the key to, the thing to remember about English translation, right? All translation is interpretation. So the Hebrew meaning hasn't changed, but but I think what, in part having talked to Shelley and Janet over the years as they've been working on this, they're trying to, I think, understand better in the context of the Hebrew, what the meaning, what these idiomatic things are trying to convey. So that,
So
the Hebrew,
does that mean that a Hebrew speaker would use those words for city square, or if they use the words where they'd be meaning it's in part two?
Not necessarily, because this is biblical Hebrew, right? So the way biblical Hebrew is understood and the way modern Hebrew is understood, right? Modern Hebrew is based on the understanding of biblical Hebrew meanings, but sometimes applied in different ways, or used in a broader context. So this is trying to kind of, I think, convey both a sense of the literal meaning of the text, but also, so this is a great opportunity to then look on the bottom left here. If you look at number 2, let's see if I highlight this. Does it do that? Yes.
City square.
So city square. So in modern Hebrew, rechov means street. However, in biblical Hebrew, the same word denotes a broad, open square or plaza. So there is that sense of broadness that
This one has.
that translation has. But I think they're trying to sort of suggest like the nature of they're not just saying we're going to sleep in the street. They're saying like we're going to kind of sleep in the city center. And again, it's right where it says we'll spend the night. The verb nalin means to sojourn or spend a short amount of time. Electing to spend the night outdoors in the city square, away from safety. I mean, I think that's kind of the thing that it implies, would be highly abnormal and dangerous. Oh, so many comments. All right, Ellen, and then Shelley, and then
Thank
Steve in
you.
the back.
The women's commentary says that they said, quote, "will stay the night in the open." It doesn't define it as the town
Right.
square or anything else. And my note said, so they can investigate.
Interesting. Right. In part, it's is it an investigation of the reaction to their presence in this very open, vulnerable space? Shelley.
So I have a question about, if I heard you correctly, the interpretation that these are the same messengers, possibly angels that visited Abraham, and they've now just kind of journeyed on. So 2 questions about that. So one is, weren't there 3 who visited Abraham, and now there's 2, so what happened to the other person? And then,
Maybe he had other
or the
business
other,
to attend
the other
to, yeah.
being, right? And then the
He went to
second
Gomorrah.
question,
Yeah, there you go.
which seems like there would be volumes of commentary if you follow this line of thought, would be if these are indeed the same, messengers, possibly angels, their subsequent behavior in the situation with Lot would not seem to be a blessing. Let's put it that way.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So are we supposed to think that angels can have bad intentions as well as good intentions? I mean,
It's an
it
interesting
really
que-
it opens up a lot of questions to say that these are understood to be the same.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an interesting question as well about, I think that's why the phrase emissaries is used, is, they're, right, Malachim, it's interesting because it's also connected to the idea of like work, right? Like they're kind of sent for the purpose, of whomever sent them, right? They don't necessarily. I think the implication there is they don't necessarily have like so much intention or agency or agenda of their own. They're kind of carrying out the mission of whomever or whatever sent them. All right, Steve, and then we're coming back. And here we'll actually take a look at this. And it's worth noting this is on the left here is the pshat, the kind of elucidation. This was written by Professor Christine Garraway, who's a professor of Bible at HUC in Los Angeles. She says the two emissaries arrive in Sodom. Their hostile reception confirms God's assessment of people's immorality. Before destroying the city, spoiler alert, the visitors encourage Lot and his family to flee. Lot successfully requests that they spare a nearby town so that he and his family can flee there. Once they've escaped, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. The emissaries' reception in Sodom contrasts starkly with their reception by Abraham in 18:1-8. While this episode has long been interpreted as a polemic against homosexuality, we'll look at that in a second, its core issue is actually something else entirely, the exploitation of vulnerable people such as travelers. So that's actually more about, they're the like lightning rod for the behavior of the city, more so than they seem to have like an agenda of their own. This episode can be read as a parody of Hospitality Gone Wrong, centering hospitality in two ways. First, the actions of the residents of Sodom transgress the cultural values of hospitality and prove that the city deserves God's punishment. Second, Lot and the hospitality he offers the emissaries provide a literary foil for Abraham, whereas Abraham exhibits the perfect hospitality and in return receives news of Sarah's imminent pregnancy. Lot offers substandard hospitality and in return receives news of Sodom's imminent destruction. So, Steve, I'll let you ask your question, then we're going to read a few more verses just so we kind of have the full picture of the story, and then we'll dive into the commentary.
Shabbat Shalom, Steve.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I just really was enjoying the Rabbi's Martyr translation here, and I looked up the BDB for both the words that were just asked about, the word that they translate as emissaries, and it comes from a root that means to dispatch as a messenger. So an emissary is a perfectly valid way of translating. Again, every translation is an interpretation. It's a perfectly valid way of giving us modern people an understanding of what it might mean, which is 100% faithful to the BDB, the concordance, the
Right.
dictionaries that tell you what it could mean. So it never ceases to amaze me how they become both poetic and very down to earth in their translation.
And
the same thing with the other word that we were talking about, which is now
City Square.
City Square, which really means a broad place or a street,
Right.
and it could mean a plaza. And they're saying, well, let's be modern about it and tell you what it might mean right now, today. I think it's wonderful the way they take out a shot and yet give us a very direct understanding of what it could possibly be, so we can imagine it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also an interesting question. Years ago, I got to study with Joel Hoffman, who's Larry Hoffman's son, Larry Hoffman, the liturgist. Joel Hoffman is an interpreter of Bible and liturgy. And one thing to keep in, that he said it's important to keep in mind, and I actually think that this is a different example of that, but that many of the English interpretations, like I would say things like the JPS interpretation, JPS translation, many translations of Torah that are in English, still to this day, are responding and relating in some way to the King James translation from 400 or 500 years ago. And some of the ways in which they interpreted things were just flat out wrong because they didn't necessarily have the modern scholarship or the archaeological context or even necessarily an understanding of what else was going on in the ancient Near East to understand like what that word, which might mean one thing as a word but might mean something slightly different as an idiom.
And they worked from the Greek. They didn't necessarily work from the Hebrew.
Right.
So they didn't have a BDB that said,
Right,
here's
so-
what those Hebrew words mean.
Right, so things like the Everett Fox translation is in some ways, and I would argue this translation as well, is in some ways kind of acknowledging that, but trying to create something more from scratch. And I remember, probably about a year or two after Rabbi Marta retired, I was talking to her and I ran into them at a thing for my daughter and their granddaughter, and I was asking how the translation is going, and Shelley was like as giddy as a school kid. But he was saying, every day we discover something new and some new insight, some new way of looking at things. So it's really trying to kind of, again, like use all these tools that we have now in theory, right? Access to, Dahlia, to the point about the Talmud, right? A way of, all these resources from throughout history that are available either on the internet or in libraries that were not on the radar even of folks, right? The women's, and the thing to keep in mind is the women's Torah commentary is largely just using the JPS translation, the more modern JPS translation from the early 2000s, with some updates around gendered language. But so this is a pretty major development in the world of Bible translation. Okay, Ellen and then Dahlia. And then we're going to look at more text.
Ellen Taffine, one thing that puzzles me a little bit is Lot is a member of this town. He's one of the inhabitants of this town, and he understands the wrongdoings of his fellow citizens and why he chooses to live there. Does he adopt any of their ways? Does he join in sort of like a mob control?
It seems like we'll read the rest of the story that I think will answer that question, because it seems like while he's living there, I don't know that this is his town, right? He's perhaps a sojourner there as well. He's chosen for whatever reason to stay in this town. So he's living there, right? He's got a house that he can welcome guests into, but it seems pretty apparent that he is not like of the town in the same way that, it seems like the story is trying to draw a distinction between the character of Lot and the nature of the townspeople.
Okay, he has.
So we'll look at it and
He
see if
has
that.
2 daughters that married. So did they marry inhabitants of the town?
That's an interesting question. All right, Dahlia.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. I want to talk a little bit about the limitation inherited in translation. And I'm kind of observing the conversation, and I ask myself, what would have happened if instead of finding a modern, up-to-date equivalent to Shar Ha'ir, that can be all kinds of things. I can imagine that maybe in 20 years, it will be translated, they met in the mall. Or 20,
Right.
50 years ago, they would say they met in town hall. Or there are all kind of, they're trying to capture, and look how long we are talking about it.
Yeah.
And I ask myself the question, what would have happened if they would just say they met in the gate of the town, and then we would talk about what does it mean to meet in the gate of the town? What was the social life there? What was the meaning of sitting? Was it the important place to sit? Was it all the reject and the periphery? What does that mean? So in discussing the naked text, there is more value than worrying about pop culture. What
Yeah.
would I say?
And I think that's the effort of this translation, is to place the translation in the context of its time, right? That it's not necessarily to say they met at the mall, which is like the place that in 2025, or in 1980s Valley, the Valley in Los Angeles, right? Like the Valley, where I grew up. The mall is the meeting place. Like they're trying to place it right, and there's even this comment, right, about the gate of Sodom, right? In ancient Southwest Asia, the gate was a city's primary location for economic and legal transaction. Judges were also known to hold court in the chambers there, right? And we see that from other stories throughout the Tanakh of the gate of the city not just being an open and closed gate, but really like this meeting point that is a bigger symbol. Okay, Rena. Rena, go ahead quickly, and then we're gonna look at.
I just want to say that as we talk about all these things, I'm thinking about what is the Torah trying to do for us, and it's trying to make us be more moral people, relationship with God, and the more we talk about, the road, the square, the this, the that, I'm thinking that we're losing the overall thrust of the Torah, as far as I know, as wanting to have a relationship that's good between people and relationship with God. And I think that in some ways, all these things are almost beside the point.
Yes and no. I mean, I think understanding the nuance and the detail is valuable. Certainly, we're doing to a certain extent what the rabbis have always done, which is to really nitpick every jot and tittle, as they say, right? Right, kind of every nuance of trying to understand like what is going on. I mean, and to a certain extent, understanding, the emissary's request to stay in the city square and to see Lot's response. There's something interesting that seems to be setting something up for the rest of the story. So, having said that, Elaine, can I ask you to read 4, and then I'll the rest of the translation here, and then I'm going to switch to the next page as well.
4 to 7.
Yeah.
Before they could lie down, the townsfolk, the people of Sodom, young and old alike, the whole populace, every single one, closed in around the house. They called out to Lot and said to him, "Where are the people who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can know them." Lot went out to them at the entrance and shut the door behind him. He said, "My friends, please don't do this bad thing."
Okay, let me get to the next page. Here we go.
"Consider this if you would. I have 2 daughters who have never known a man. Do let me bring them out to you, and you can do whatever seems good to you. But to these people, do nothing, seeing that they have come under the shelter of my roof." They said, "Get out of the way." Then they said, "Should someone who came here as a stranger presume to play the judge?"
Right, so that's maybe speaking to Ellen's question about, right, Lot's kind of insider versus outsider nature, right? They see him still as an outsider. Sorry, go ahead.
"Now we'll do worse to you than to them." They pressed hard against Lot and pushed forward to break down the door. But the people put out their hands, pulled Lot toward them into the house, and shut the door. As for the people at the entrance of the house, they struck them, small and great alike, with a burst of blinding light, so they were unable to find the entrance.
Okay.
Then the people said to Lot, should I go?
Sure, read the next one.
Then the people said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here? Relatives, your sons and daughters, anyone you have in the city? Get them out of the place, for we're about to wreak ruin on this place. The anguished cry against them has grown so strong right in front of the Eternal, that Eternal has sent us to wreak ruin on it."
Right, so where it says the people, those are the emissaries, are saying, we're here on a mission, and these people have just demonstrated, right? And it's interesting, Rena, to a certain extent, going back to your question about kind of looking at really specific language, where it says in verse 4, the people of Sodom, young and old alike, the whole populace, every single one. In other words, lest you think, lest you be reading this text with the memory from the chapter just before this of Abraham's negotiation with God, right? If I can find 10 people, will you spare the city? 10 righteous people will you spare, or innocent people will you spare the city? It's like the text is responding to that negotiation and saying, see, there are none. They're all here, trying to knock down the door. And so here, right, Anshe Sodom. And it's worth noting, not just Anshe Sodom, it says Anshe, right, Anshe Ha'ir, the people of the city, Anshe Sodom, the people of Sodom, Nasabu al Habayit, they came to the bait, to the house, Mina'ar ve'ad zaken, from the young and the old, Kol ha'am mikatzeh, right? The whole population, right? Every single one. So the Hebrew is as reflective as the English translation here, and it says here, Anshe Sodom could instead refer only to the men of Sodom. Similarly, Kol ha'am, translated here as the whole populace, sometimes refers only to men, or to the totality of a specific group. Because of these ambiguities, it is impossible to determine whether the mob includes women and children, and consequently whether the episode confirms that all the residents of Sodom are worthy of punishment, or just the men. So interesting that even though there's sort of this attempt to, I would argue that the text is trying to eliminate ambiguity. When you kind of add this layer of gender into it, there's still some ambiguity as to exactly who all the town, or Anshe Sodom is referring to. Yeah, Mariella. And then Naomi.
Thank you, Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Something that just came up in my mind when Abraham is bargaining with God so much, well, if there's 50, if there's this. What is Abraham's big motivation there? Because Lot is his brother, right?
Mm-hmm. Nephew.
His nephew.
Right,
His
sorry.
nephew. So the fact that he argues so strongly, is he saying to God, just please save my family? What if my family is okay? And the rest, it's, will you
That's
still...
That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I perhaps, but I would say it's an interesting question. I don't know, because I've always read it as it being more selfless than that, right? That he's really trying to kind of push this sense of like innocence and guilt on a broader sense. I mean, and to a certain extent, it's interesting to think about whether Abraham is thinking about Lot as part of the city that will be destroyed or not. It's unclear. Let's see, Naomi, and then Giora, and then Jamie. Whew.
Hi, thank you. I'm not sure, because I'm just trying to talk about the Rehov again, but maybe it's not so important, because we try to talk more about the essence of the story. So my thought is more about the translation, that I think it's wrong. It's completely not looking at the word Rehov, which is from Resh Chet Bet Rachav, which means wide. And they don't because all the words are so important, and each word is so important. If you look how many times the word Rachav, Rehov, Rachava appears in the Torah, it's so wide, and they don't even mention wide, let alone the word Rachav for the whore in Yericho, which is a completely different story. But to say a square actually put the whole thing in a very limited place, and Rehov, it's the opposite of a square.
Interesting. I mean,
Comes
it is
from
kind of an
wide.
open place, right? Like there's something kind of exposed about it, right? Even if you were to translate it as in the street, though I think that to a certain extent, as modern readers, we would have a certain understanding of like they wanted to sleep in the street, or even in the wild. But in the street in particular, like I think, we might go immediately to like people who are unhoused, who are sleeping in the street. But this is sort of, there's, I think whatever the term is, it's trying to suggest that these travelers are initially trying to push Lot to let them stay in this very open and vulnerable space. And Lot, perhaps recognizing the kind of something about the nature of his neighbors, is really insistent that that is not a good idea. Like, I think that's the thing to take away. All right, Giora.
But we are talking about specific words. And
Right.
when you say square, it's a limited place. Wide is a wide place. And they're using two completely different concepts of words, either in Hebrew or in English. That's what I think, but I wouldn't argue with the rabbis. That's
No,
the way
it's an
I
interesting
see
question.
it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, Giora, go ahead.
Giora, thank you. I want to refer to what you say, everybody, maybe it's only the men, maybe not the elder or children or women. There is argument about it. And I try to refer it to what happened, what I'm reading today about what happened in Gaza. Some Israelis say everybody in Gaza was supporting Hamas, including the children, including the women, including that. And other people say maybe part of it, what the children, what is the fault of the children, for example. So I try to refer what you say to what happened today in Gaza.
Interesting. Let's see. Larry, Joshua, and Jamie.
So, Larry Shapiro, I want to comment about the translation in general. As I read the whole thing, I don't really see there's a huge difference between that and many of the other translations, with a couple of curious exceptions. And the first is in the very beginning, the use of the term emissary. Because an emissary means they're coming from somebody else. I mean, they're representing somebody else. And that's very, that's very interesting because that puts a third person into this whole story. But then where I get confused is when Lot is drawn back into the house by the men. It doesn't say, is that his family? Is that his son-in-laws? Or is that the emissaries? And if it is the emissaries, then why not say that?
Right.
Because that would make the whole story seem much better because
Right, it kind of hangs together with the use of the same terms. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on, sorry. I was told that we're not supposed to dwell too much on the translation, and yet here we are. But we do what we want at Congregation Beth Am.
That's right. Especially in Torah study.
Yeah.
And then the miracle occurs, or some unusual event where they're blinded.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it throws them off.
They can't see the door.
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's the specific issue.
And they're like right there. You'd think,
Okay. So, and it doesn't say how long it lasted, and it doesn't say. I mean, it just says this occurs, and that sounds. It's like leaving it hanging because it doesn't really say that the emissaries did this, and it doesn't explain what happens in the aftermath of this. I mean, it feels very unclear.
Yeah. Okay, Joshua and then Jamie.
So I believe that Lot's presence here is a device, and the major distinction of where they would like to stay versus Lot's invitation is that they want to observe the populace and their behavior. And Lot's presence then becomes the device by which we see that the people are going to display their behavior regardless of where they are, and they get to do that. And if he weren't there, then this wouldn't be as dramatic, and it wouldn't be as convincing to these two emissaries whose mission is to destroy the city if they observe the behavior of the populace as it had been predicted or surmised.
Right.
So that's what I think is going on here, and the fact that they want to be in the open initially is that they want to be out where the people are and see what happens. And it doesn't matter whether it's a town square or a circle or a plaza. It's really just not in a concealed place.
Right. And what we find, again, perhaps in kind of as a foil to the conversation that Abraham's having with God, is it ultimately doesn't even matter, right? Even when Lot insists on them staying the night in his house, the townspeople are so evil that they still come to his house, right? And say, hey, we know you've got some strangers here. Let us at them. And so to your point, it doesn't even matter, right? I think the emissaries are trying to kind of are there to kind of test the people of Sodom, who it seemed it's always an interesting question when I've studied the negotiation between Abraham and God with our 6th and 7th graders. They always say, part of the question is is the whole thing just a setup? Is God willing to negotiate with Abraham because God knows that there are no people worth saving in Sodom, or is God actually open to maybe hoping that there are? It's an interesting question. But it's an interesting question, and it seems to the way this story plays out seems to suggest they're just that terrible. Jamie.
So we've got this new translation, and yet we still have Lot, and I realize they can't change what the words say, saying, take my virgin daughters and rape them if you'd like, or whatever. And he's the guy who gets saved? Is there any commentary on this? I mean, that's ridiculous.
No, nothing to be said. No, yes, there is. I mean, and so in the last 5-10 minutes that we have, what I want to do is kind of move us over to the Mikorot. So I will literally move us over to the Mikorot. There they are. Right, to these sources and commentaries that really are looking at this question, right? Inheriting texts that have done harm, the sin of Sodom, right? Because this story, and to a certain extent, the reaction of the people of Sodom is where we get the term sodomites, right? Because of their insistence that they don't even want the daughters, right? They want the men. And so it's interesting to sort of see the way both traditional and more modern readings of that are trying to engage with that question, whether that's sort of a fair understanding or if there's something more complex going on here. So let's take a look. So in 1313, this is the top right here, the narrator had stated that the people of Sodom were terrible sinners, later condemned by the tradition to have no share in the world to come, but the text does not specify their transgression. Emphasizing the demand from Sodom's citizens to know Lot's guests, some interpreters suggest that queer sexual expression is at the heart of the city's sinfulness. This text has been used to condemn queer people in relationships, and its legacy in buttressing homophobia must be contended with. The following sources grapple with this textual misuse, offer alternative interpretations about the nature of Sodom's sin, and reflect on what it means to inherit texts that have been used in harmful ways. So it's an interesting opportunity to kind of grapple with these things. So we begin looking at a couple of traditional sources. So first, the Talmud. Why does the Torah describe the people of Sodom as both bad and sinful? Bad refers to the sins they committed with their money, and sinful refer to the sins they committed with their bodies. I found actually the text from Nachmanides that we're going to look at next, it moves the conversation into a slightly different direction, or I think broadens it a little bit more. The assembly of the people intended to stop visitors from coming to them, for they cherished their land's goodness and they hated tzedakah. So here it's about justice. Nachmanides shifts it from like sexual immorality to like just a deeper sense of justice, right, or tzedakah. When the verse describes the people of Sodom as bad and sinful, it means that they would provoke and rebel against God with the way they carelessly oppressed the poor. All evil practices were rampant among them, but their fate was sealed because of this sin, their oppression of those in need, since this sin represented their behavior most explicitly. So it's interesting that for Nachmanides, again, a traditional source is not focusing on the act of like sexual immorality or the kind of sexual nature of their transgression, but something deeper, right? Their inability, their unwillingness to welcome guests, right, as like a fundamental break. That is something that is so essential to the fabric of society, and to a certain extent, what Nachmanides I think is suggesting, maybe, is that the sexual immorality is an outgrowth of that, because they're already have broken the ties with this sense of justice that is sort of a fundamental human value. Hi, I see you. That like the sexual actions that they're suggesting is just sort of another step in that journey of sinfulness. Chaya, go ahead. Oh, and Steve, and then Chaya, sorry.
Just as you read this, I was thinking about Charlie Kirk, and I wish he would have interpreted what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah in the way about people not treating the poor very well. Because Charlie Kirk talked about Deuteronomy, one of the verses where sleeping with another man, you could be stoned to death. But in the same context of that particular Torah portion, if you don't observe Shabbat, you can also be stoned to death. If your children are poor, they're not acting correctly.
Right, the wayward children can be stoned to death too.
So it's like it's one thing to take one thing out of context to prove your point,
right.
But to be really honest about it, be nice to look at it in its entirety, and to be a little bit more fair about how the Bible is really written.
Yeah. Aya, go ahead. No,
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So, what strikes me here too is that the sexual immorality involved is not homosexuality. The sexual morality is rape and violence against a visitor. So regardless of whether, it would have been Lot's daughters or the men or what kind of sex it was, the issue here is taking people who do not want to be raped and raping them, and and visitors to your town on top of that.
Right. I think it's not a, to your point, it's not a like rereading of what they're calling for as being an act of homosexuality, so much as understanding exactly what you said, right? It's like the violent nature, like the gender of the parties involved is less important than the violent nature of what they want to do, and that is what is right. So it's trying to say like that is what's more deeply problematic. Barbara, quick thing, and then I want to look actually at this comment from Jay Michelson, who is a rabbi who was here a couple years ago.
Barbara, I'm really struck by the different reactions in two different stories. We have Lot saying, take my daughters, please, rape them, do what you want, go have fun. And then a few, chapters later, we have the rape of Dinah, where her brothers all plot revenge because of the fact that she was raped. So really, and you didn't have Jacob saying, oh great, you raped my daughter, good, now you had your fun. They did this pretend mock-up of a wedding, but that was just part of the plans to kill the whole village.
Right.
So we've got one story.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to sort of think about how we wrestle with Lot's offer is awful. I mean, it's truly horrific. You know, what parent could imagine? I mean, you know, in a couple of chapters, we're also going to look at, you know, Abraham almost sacrificing Isaac and Abraham sending Ishmael and Hagar. I mean, like, there are a lot of problematic family dynamics, let's say, happening in this parsha, let alone in the book of Genesis. I want to look at this comment from Jay Michelson. He says, these chapters of Genesis are about variations of hospitality. And I think this speaks to what Chaya was saying. Abraham's and Lot's generosity, the wickedness of Sodom, and Abraham's fear of the king in Gerar. The male Sodomites' interest in men is incidental. If they were raging homosexuals, Lot would not offer his daughters in return. Homosexual rape is the way in which they violate hospitality, not the essence of their transgression. Reading the story of Sodom as being about homosexuality is like reading the story of an axe murderer as being about an axe. Right. Which, like, there you go. Jamie, did I get to you? Okay, I thought so. So I want to just close with this final text, final comment from Rabbi Julia Watts-Belser. She says, in classic Jewish sources, Sodom is not a story that condemns male-male love. The rabbis of the Talmud retell and expand the Sodom story, dramatizing the cruelty and hard-heartedness of the city. They use the story of Sodom to condemn violence and greed, to call out hatred of the stranger, to imagine God as outraged by brutality. To illustrate, the rabbis tell this story. The people of Sodom had a certain bed on which all travelers slept. If the guest was too tall, they shortened him by cutting off his feet. If the guest was too short, they stretched him out until he fit. Though the rabbis never frame it in quite these terms, I take this story as a vivid account of ableism, of how it brutalizes flesh and bone. This is a story about the kind of violence that follows when we force people to fit complex, unruly bodies and minds into a simple, straightforward, one-size-fits-all society. When we demand that everyone walk up a few flights of stairs, read the fine print, and peer at the PowerPoint, when we assume that everyone's body and everyone's mind better fit the same bed, or else face the hatchet. This is the world in which we live, a world that would rather chop us up and spit us out than cherish the real, riotous diversity of all humankinds. So a really fascinating, like, expansion of what this text could be trying to teach, right? And it, again, it's dealing with the pshat, but it's taking it, you know, it's midrashic, right? Recognizing like a certain creative license, perhaps, that's using to expand it. So I want to stop here, and I want to also, one of the things that I wanted to do this morning as we're looking at these texts is I wanted to ask a question to this group, which is to say, this is a work in progress. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll send out feedback so that your insights of using these texts to study Torah will help shape what this project ends up looking like. And this is a project that our rabbis, right, our Rabbi Emerita is deeply involved with, and I would love to find a meaningful way for our congregation, perhaps our Torah study group as a unit within Beth Am, to honor that. So at the CCAR conference last March, we got to study a different parsha of this, and then of course they made a big pitch for fundraising. And so I would love to think with all of you what we might be able to do. Apparently, there are all sorts of levels of giving, as tends to be the case. If we want to name this whole work, the Congregation Beth Am Torah Study Group New Reform Torah Commentary, I think that's $5 million. So perhaps a little bit out of our reach. No problem. Steve is writing a check. There we go. The Steve Bauman New Reform. But I would love, there are different lower levels of either sponsoring a parsha, right, with, that perhaps we could sponsor a parsha, or having just a line of dedication. in the introduction. To sponsor a parsha is no small feat, though. It's $25,000. I'm not sure if that's something that, like, as a collective, we would be interested in doing or committed to doing. The other thing is, I recognize we don't want to. I will say I don't want to dip into what you all might be giving to Beth Am. This would be a separate thing. But to think about, what is a meaningful gift that we could make to the CCAR, to this project, to make sure that, like, Beth Am has our name printed in this book whenever it's printed, with an acknowledgement of our love and our all we've learned from the Rabbi's martyr over the years. So I don't want to come to any conclusions. If you have questions or thoughts about this, come talk to me. But I want to plant that seed that it would be, I think, a beautiful opportunity that we have in the next year or so. Like, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, to think about a way in which we might meaningfully contribute to this project, really to just show our appreciation for our teacher of Torah, particularly Rabbi Janet Martyr, but I know we've all learned a lot of Torah from Shelley as well.
So what does it cost to sponsor a word?
A word of Torah. I don't know. Right. I mean, yeah, 30. That's a good question, but I've got to look at the chart to see what it is to, like, just have, like, a dedication in the beginning. Like in the women's Torah commentary, right? There are all the dedications before the table of contents or after. Yeah.
So Rabbi Heath, I think, I don't have a mic there, but
Yeah.
I think we need to do this in an organized
Yes.
so it actually happens.
Right.
Okay. So I think probably we need to correspond with the Torah study list. I'm happy to take on part of this. Maybe somebody can do it with me. But I mean, we really need to, if we're going to do it,
Right.
we'd have to ask people specifically.
Yes.
And let everybody, there's not a pressure,
Right,
But
right.
then we'll see what we get. And
Yeah.
then when we see what we get, we can go ahead and decide
Right.
where we are and if we want to go higher or,
Yeah, I think that's a good
need
time,
to
right? To
do
kind
it
of get a temperature of, like, what would you be? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, what I've learned from Rabbi Hera Person, who's kind of overseeing this project at the CCR, she was saying, like, some Torah study groups have gotten together and everybody contributes, I don't know, $10 to $100, let's say. That would be a significant contribution if we all came up with that. And maybe some can do more and some can do less. But it's something to think. Yes. So this is the beginning of a conversation. I don't really want to do fundraising on Shabbat anyways, but I just want to plant the idea that I think it would be a beautiful thing for us as a congregation and as this Torah study community within Beth Am to acknowledge that relationship. Okay, so let's rise for Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Thank you all for your insights, for your engagement. It was fun to explore and wrestle with something new. Let the glory of God be extolled. Let God's great name be hallowed in the world whose creation God willed. May God's sovereignty soon prevail in our own day, our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say Amen. Let God's great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One of blessing be glorified, exalted, and honored, though God is beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations we can utter. And let us say Amen. God of heaven and earth, grant abundant peace to our people and their leaders, to our teachers and their disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah here and everywhere. Let there be for them and for us all grace, love, and compassion, joyful life, sustenance, and the hope of your sovereignty. And let us say Amen. For us, for all Israel, and for all humanity, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true. And let us say Amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world. And let us say Amen. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.